Hi, Clint Kuhns here with Anderson Business Advisors, and in this video, I want to discuss the impact of COVID-19 on your investing. All right, let's get started. Okay, so COVID-19, it's out there, it's everywhere. And I understand that it is a concern for all individuals, but I think especially for real estate investors because we have properties, right? And you've seen it, the governors are telling people you don't have to pay rent. And people believe that, hey, if I don't have a job or I'm unemployed, I'm collecting unemployment, I don't need to spend that money on rent because the governor told me I don't need to pay rent. Well, what does that mean to you as the landlord? It means you can't pay your mortgage, you can't pay your property taxes, you can't pay your insurance. So all this rolls back up onto us, the landlords, who are providing this to our tenants. And so this can be a financial burden for you. So as a result of COVID-19, what we're starting to see, of course, and you may have already experienced this already, is that you're going to run into a cash crunch. And so when I'm looking at this from a legal standpoint, what I actually see here is you have two types of individuals right now, two camps, that is, when it comes to asset protection. You have those individuals who are going to be worried about their assets and what can go wrong there. And you have those other individuals that are worried about getting sued and losing everything they have. And so I don't know where you fall into those two camps, but you should be implementing different strategies to make sure that both types of risk are minimized to the greatest extent as possible. So let's assume that you have rental property. What should you be focusing on right now? Make sure that property is divided up into separate LLCs. And so you've heard me talk about this a lot in my other videos, is that we're talking creating one LLC per property, right? Just like this. Now, if you're in this camp right here, you're concerned about what may happen if somebody wanted to sue you for COVID-19, which makes sense. Because let's face it, insurance is not going to cover you. I've already read plenty of newspaper articles. I've seen plenty of interviews on insurance companies stating that COVID-19 cases are not covered under the policy. Now, when I say COVID-19 cases, what could that be? Let's say you got a property right here. You send out a property manager goes out there, or maybe a contractor goes out there because the furnace isn't working. They go into the property, they have COVID, but they're not showing any signs or symptoms of it, and they expose your tenant to it. And that tenant has underlying conditions and they pass away. Well, who are they going to sue? They're going to find somebody who has the deepest pockets, and that may be you. And so they bring a claim against the owner of this LLC, the LLC that owns the property. And if this LLC owns multiple properties, you've just risked 3 properties. So that is a concern that I see coming up. Unless the legislature does something to stop aggressive attorneys from bringing these types of actions, there's going to be risk there for us as real estate investors. So you want to take steps to minimize your overall risk exposure and start pulling these properties out and separating out the liability exposure into different entities. So if something does go wrong, the most you stand to lose is just that one property in that one entity. So tenants are a risk. If it's say it's a multifamily property with community spaces, there's another concern there, right? You could have a sick building. Maybe a lot of tenants get it because you're not taking adequate steps to minimize the risk of infection by using disinfectant in all the common areas, in the elevators, in the stairwells where people touch and things like that. I mean, this is an unprecedented time when it comes to liability exposure. And we just don't know what the outcome's going to be, at least for another year or two, as these cases start getting brought. So I see that as a concern. If you're a small business owner, right? One of the things you don't want to be doing is holding a lot of assets in your business. You got to pull your assets out to make sure you're not going to be trapped in a situation like this. Let's say I have a company right here that owns real estate and I have a bunch of cash inside of it as well that I'm sitting on right now. Well, you start bringing your employees back, what could happen? Well, if one of them contracts it from going out and being unsafe, and they bring that into the office, and then they spread it to 3 or 4 other employees, who's that risk going to fall back up on? It's going to roll back up on the business owner, because what they're going to assert, that is an attorney, is that you weren't using good, safe practices. Now, what are safe practices? That's debatable. What, do they have to all wear masks in the office? But if they're on the phone all day long, that doesn't work, right? 6 feet apart. Well, what happens if someone sneezes and they have projectile snot that goes across the room? You get it? It's impossible to prevent against every possible contingency. But attorneys will hold you to this unreal attainable standard that you are somehow negligent if you do not meet this and eliminate any possibility of contraction amongst your employees. Unless you stick them in a bubble and bring in all their electronics so they can sit in that bubble, or you tell them to stay home, it's the only way you're going to be able to do it. That's not feasible. So make sure you're getting these assets out. That cash should be over here in a separate entity. And if possible, you want to get that real estate out of your business as well. So it's over here in a separate entity. So if the business gets sued, you haven't risked your savings in cash and you haven't risked your property. So this is camp number one. This is people that are concerned about their assets or their employees creating liability for them inside of these entities. So you want to minimize your risk exposure. Camp number two is that maybe you're in a situation where you have an Airbnb property and you're worried about paying the mortgage because Airbnb, as you know, they laid off 1,900 people. They put in new procedures. We have to do 72 hours before you can do a turn on a property. Well, this really screws up the metrics. When many investors bought into these properties, it was with an expectation that they could be turning that property every 3 to 7 days, 5 days, and it was just going to be maybe a 6-hour turn. And so they have these numbers built, these models that they could afford an $8,000 mortgage. Maybe you're in this situation right now because you're going to be bringing in $12K a month. Well, that's all changed. Now the question becomes, what are you doing to minimize your risk exposure? I can tell you, I've been through this before. 2008, 9, and 10. I saw a lot of individuals lose their investments and their assets because they weren't properly structured when it came to their investing, because they didn't see this. They see the legal risk with the assets, with the employees, real estate, but they don't see it from the lenders. Lenders are risk to us as well. You can't pay your mortgage, they're coming after you. So what you should be doing is making sure that all of your other assets are put beyond the reach of your creditors so you can't be wiped out. As I said, I saw people file for bankruptcy, real estate investors that had a lot of assets, but they were forced into bankruptcy because of lenders. And I saw other investors walk away where the banks had $3, $4, $5 million in deficiency judgments against them, but they couldn't collect on it because of the structures that they had put in place to prevent someone. So here's some rule of thumb that you should be focusing on. Any types of investments that you have as far as savings, right? Your savings account, your brokerage account, if you have an investment account, that account there, if you have any metals, any types of investments, anything that's not in your personal checking account, what I want you to do is create an entity right here. This would be an LLC, and I would set up this LLC in either Wyoming or Delaware. I'd get that entity set up there because those states offer great asset protection. And creditors, in my experience, they don't want to mess with this stuff because they know they're not going to be able to collect. If they're coming after you, a lender's coming after you personally, and they pull a debtor's exam on you because they get a judgment against you and they say, well, what do you own? You start throwing up stuff like this. I own all these boxes that I've set up for myself. That is what I call attorney be gone, right? It's just stuff you just sprinkle on your assets. They smell that and they don't want to be around because this isn't worth going after. It's too difficult. There are plenty of other investors out there, people that have been putting money into real estate by keeping it in their own name or keeping their savings in their own name. That's the low-hanging fruit. Let's go focus on them because we can take those assets. I don't want to fight for it. So get all your liquid types investments protected, 529 plans, that I'd look at doing that. Now your retirement accounts as well, IRAs. If you have traditional IRAs, you may want to consider setting up a solo 401k and moving that money up there, getting it out of your IRA, because depending on your state law, your IRA may or may not be protected against personal creditors. So you got to be aware of that and how that works. So really what you should do is a top-down analysis of what's in your name and what's at risk. Your personal residence, okay? Take your personal residence. If you don't live in a state like Texas or Florida that has an unlimited homestead exemption, let's get a land trust set up for that. We'll just call that LT. Get a land trust set up. Get it out of your name. All right, use a nominee trustee on this. Watch one of my other videos on land trust and who you could choose as your trustee there. Set that up. So now if a judgment was entered against you, it won't attach to your property because the property is no longer in your name. It's in the name of a trust. So if somebody came and they dropped that judgment on you, you could still refi that property. You could still sell that property and those creditors wouldn't be paid off. So do a top down and look at your assets right now. If you fall into the camp where you're concerned that you have potential creditors, personal creditors, you've signed onto things personally where you have exposure, you need to move those assets. If you don't, and you wait until the wolves are at the door, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do for you at that point in time because it's too late. You're already under a reasonable degree of certainty that someone's going to bring a judgment against you. So you got to be proactive here. And it's just sound business planning, financial planning, is to make sure that these assets are in your name so no one can take them from you. All right, guys, be safe out there. My name is Clint Coons with Anderson Business Advisors.